She checked her watch. 90 seconds. That's all she had to decide if 12 men were worth her career, her freedom, maybe her life. The rifle felt cold against her cheek, the frost-covered rooftop beneath her knees hard as judgment. Below, in a demolished street decorated with Christmas lights and death, 12 Navy SEALs were about to learn what abandonment felt like. Above them, Sarah Vance was about to learn what courage cost. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back 3 hours, to the moment everything started to fall apart. Marcus Reed had seen beautiful cities become graveyards before. 20 years of service gives you that kind of education. But this one haunted him differently. Maybe it was the garland still hanging from shattered storefronts, swaying in the December wind like forgotten prayers. Maybe it was the plastic Santa lying face down in a crater, one arm reaching toward nothing. Maybe it was knowing that somewhere back home, families were setting out milk and cookies, while his team walked into what intelligence promised would be a simple operation. Simple, that word should have been his first warning. 30 seconds to checkpoint Bravo, Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled through the calm, breath visible in the freezing air. Reed nodded even though Morrison couldn't see him in the dark. 12 men moved like shadows through the ruined street. 12 of the best. Each one had survived selection rates that would break ordinary soldiers. Each one had earned the trident. Each one trusted the intelligence that had sent them here. That trust was about to cost them everything. Reed raised his fist at the corner building. The team froze. Something felt wrong. The intelligence had called this area minimal resistance, but his thermal scope told a different story. 7 heat signatures, then 12, then 20. His instinct screamed what his training tried to ignore. Command, this is Alpha 6. We have visual on approximately 20 hostiles at checkpoint Bravo, requesting clarification on intel assessment. Static, then more static, then words that should have sent them running. Alpha 6, stand by for confirmation. Proceed with mission parameters. 20 years of combat had given Reed an instinct sharper than any briefing document. This wasn't a weapons cache. This was a fortress, but orders were orders. He'd followed them through Fallujah, through Ramadi, through countless operations that seemed impossible until they weren't. He signaled the advance. They moved in tactical formation through what had been someone's home. Family photos still clung to one wall. A child's drawing, a Christmas tree in crayon, presents underneath. Specialist Danny Torres, 23 years old and still carrying his girlfriend's picture inside his helmet, was the first to spot the trip wire. But the explosion didn't come from the wire. It came from everywhere at once. RPG fire lit up the night like hellish fireworks. Tracer rounds carved red lines through the darkness. The air filled with the metallic screech of bullets ricocheting off stone and steel. The building to their left collapsed, cutting off their exit route. Dust and debris filled the street like a sandstorm. Reed counted through the chaos, all 12 still moving, all 12 still fighting, all 12 completely surrounded. Command, this is Alpha 6. We are taking heavy fire, multiple hostiles. We need immediate air support and extraction. Static, then a voice, calm and bureaucratic like he'd requested a weather update. Alpha 6, stand by. Stand by as if they had time, as if they weren't already dying. Sergeant Victor Hayes threw himself behind the barrier next to Reed, breathing hard. 3 kids back home. Christmas pajamas in the photos he'd shown Reed before they left base. They knew we were coming, Hayes said, changing magazines with practiced efficiency. This was planned. Reed knew Hayes was right. This wasn't an ambush. This was an execution. But he didn't know the worst part yet. He didn't know that 8,000 miles away, in a command center with fluorescent lights and fresh coffee, men in clean uniforms were making calculations that had nothing to do with saving lives. 8,000 miles away, Sarah Vance was making very different calculations. She'd been tracking Alpha 6's mission from the intelligence center, headphones on, monitoring 3 separate operations across 2 continents. Routine work, Boring work. The kind of work that let her mind wander to Christmas plans and whether she'd have time to call her sister before the holiday shift ended. Then she heard the change in Reed's voice, the tension, the fear trying to hide behind training. "We are taking heavy fire, multiple hostiles. We need immediate air support and extraction." Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up their location, their thermal signatures, the enemy positions closing in. 12 Americans, surrounded, outnumbered 4-1, maybe 5-1. The math was simple and brutal. She opened a channel to tactical command. "Sir, Alpha 6 is in serious trouble. They need immediate extraction." The response came back flat, emotionless. "Negative. Political situation has changed. Host government is threatening international incident if we escalate. Alpha 6 is ordered to hold position and await further instruction." Sarah's blood went cold. Colder than the December air Reed was breathing. Colder than the frost forming on her monitor as she stared at 12 dots representing 12 lives. "Sir, they can't hold that position. They're surrounded there." "Orders stand, Specialist Vance. Monitor the situation and report any changes." Monitor the situation. Professional language for watching men die. She'd heard it before 2 months ago with the Marine unit in the Eastern Corridor. She'd followed orders then, watched the dots disappear one by one, heard the screams fade to static, written the report with steady hands and a breaking heart. She'd promised herself never again. But promising yourself something and actually doing it are two very different things. Sarah pulled off her headphones. Around her, the intelligence center hummed with normal activity. Analysts studied screens. Officers reviewed reports. Someone laughed at a joke she didn't hear. The world continued, oblivious to the small catastrophe unfolding on her monitor. 12 dots, 12 men, 12 families who'd wake up on Christmas morning to learn their father, their husband, their son wasn't coming home. Because of politics, because of threat assessment, because following orders mattered more than saving lives. She thought about her father, 28 years in the Army, retired with full honors and a chest full of medals. He taught her that soldiers follow orders, that the chain of command exists for a reason, that individual judgment can't override institutional authority. He'd taught her well. She'd been a perfect soldier until tonight. Sarah stood up. Her supervisor glanced over, eyebrows raised. "Bathroom break," she said, calm, professional, the kind of lie that sounded like truth. She walked past the supervisor's station, past the security checkpoint, past the break room where someone had hung mistletoe as a joke. She walked until she reached the equipment room, where her gear waited in a locker with her name stenciled on the front. Her hands were steady as she pulled out her rifle. Her breathing was calm as she checked the magazine. Her mind was clear as she made a decision that would end her military career and possibly her freedom. But there was something else, something underneath the clarity, a quiet voice asking questions she couldn't ignore. What if this was wrong? What if the orders existed for reasons she couldn't see? What if her judgment, her singular perspective, led to something worse than 12 deaths? What if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life? She pushed the questions down, locked them away, because 12 men didn't have time for her doubts. Sarah grabbed her gear and headed for the roof access. Someone called her name. She kept walking. Someone asked where she was going. She didn't answer, because if she stopped to explain, if she gave herself time to think, she might remember all the reasons why this was insane. The rooftop was bitter cold. Wind cut through her uniform like broken glass. The city spread before her, a patchwork of lights and darkness, beauty and destruction. Somewhere down there in that maze of rubble and desperation, 12 men were running out of time. She moved to the eastern edge, set up her position with the muscle memory of 1,000 training sessions, checked her scope, found the target building, found the heat signatures of Alpha 6, huddled behind whatever cover they could find, found the enemy forces closing in, methodical and patient, like wolves circling wounded prey. Sarah's finger rested on the trigger guard, not on the trigger, not yet, because once she pulled that trigger, once she engaged against direct orders, there was no going back, no apology, no explanation that would satisfy a court-martial. Her radio crackled. All units maintain current posture. No engagement without authorization. Repeat, no engagement. The voice was Colonel Hardwick. She'd met him once. Clean uniform, firm handshake. The kind of officer who believed following procedure was the highest form of duty. He probably believed he was making the right call. Probably had good reasons. Political considerations. Strategic implications. The bigger picture that sacrificed 12 lives for some abstract greater good. Sarah had believed in the bigger picture once, before she'd heard men die over the radio, while people in clean uniforms explained why saving them wasn't strategically sound. She checked her watch. 23:47, 13 minutes until Christmas. 13 minutes until families started their celebrations while 12 men learned what betrayal felt like. Below, Reed's voice came through the comm. Desperate now, control slipping. Command, we cannot hold this position. We need extraction now. Hardwick's response was ice. Orders stand, Alpha 6. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Minimize noise. Extraction will come when situation permits. When situation permits. Professional language for never. Sarah's finger moved from the trigger guard to the trigger. A tiny movement, barely an inch, but that inch contained everything. Her career, her freedom, her father's disappointment, her own certainty that some orders deserved to be broken. She took a breath, held it, and in that moment of perfect stillness, she understood something her father had never taught her. That courage wasn't about following orders. It was about knowing when to break them. The first shot broke the night open like thunder. Sarah's rifle kicked against her shoulder, familiar and brutal. Through her scope, she watched the enemy fighter drop, his weapon clattering against stone. The other fighters scattered, looking for the source of the shot, looking everywhere except up. She fired again, and again, each shot a choice, each choice a severance from everything she'd built. 22 years old, 4 years of service, a spotless record about to be destroyed by 90 seconds of disobedience. But 90 seconds was all they needed. Reed's voice came through the comm, sharp with surprise. We have sniper support. Unknown origin. All units use the coverage and move to secondary extraction point. Sarah tracked the enemy positions, her shots forcing them back, creating corridors of safety for Alpha 6 to maneuver through. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. Her mind was perfectly calm even as she committed what the military would call treason. Because she'd done the math, 12 lives versus 1 career, the equation wasn't complicated. Through her scope, she watched Alpha 6 move. Hayes carrying Tors who'd taken shrapnel to the leg. Morrison providing cover while Chen worked his radio, trying to reach anyone who might help. Reed at the rear, rifle up, eyes scanning, trusting the sniper he couldn't see. Trusting her. Sarah's magazine ran dry. She reloaded with practiced speed, fingers moving automatically while her mind tracked targets, calculated angles, measured time. 60 seconds gone, 30 left. The enemy was regrouping, realizing their advantage was slipping. They'd push hard now. One final surge. She needed to make every shot count. The radio crackled in her ear. Hardwick's voice no longer calm, no longer bureaucratic. All units identify sniper position. Unknown shooter is engaging against direct orders. This is a priority tasking. Unknown shooter. As if they didn't know. As if her position wasn't broadcasting on every thermal scope in the command center. As if Hardwick wasn't watching her right now, watching her commit career suicide one bullet at a time. She didn't care. She'd stopped caring 30 shots ago. Alpha 6 reached the secondary extraction point. An alley, narrow and defensible. Not perfect, but better than the kill zone they'd been trapped in. Reed's voice came through, steady now in control. "Command, Alpha 6 has relocated to defensive position. We can hold here until extraction arrives." If extraction arrives, he didn't say it, but Sarah heard it anyway. The doubt, the understanding that they'd been abandoned, that whatever happened next they were on their own. But they weren't on their own. Not while she had ammunition, not while she had 90 seconds. 15 seconds left. She fired 3 more shots, forcing the enemy back, giving Alpha 6 time to set their defense. Her radio exploded with voices. Hardwick ordering her to stand down. Her supervisor demanding she return to her station. Security forces being dispatched to her location. She ignored them all, because in 15 seconds this would be over. Either she'd be arrested or Alpha 6 would be safe. There was no middle ground. The enemy made their push. A final surge toward Alpha 6's position. Sarah's rifle sang. 1, 2, 3, targets dropping, advance faltering, the enemy breaking, falling back, retreating into the shadows. She checked her watch. 90 seconds exactly. Alpha 6 was alive. 12 men breathing. 12 futures still intact. The cost, everything she'd built. But as she set down her rifle and waited for security to arrive, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected. Peace. The arrest was professional, almost gentle. 2 MPs appeared on the rooftop, weapons drawn but not aimed. "Specialist Vance, you need to come with us." She stood slowly, hands visible, no sudden movements. She trained them well enough to know how this worked. "I understand." They escorted her down from the roof. Through corridors she'd walked 1,000 times. Past colleagues who stared with expressions ranging from shock to something that might have been admiration. Past her supervisor, whose face showed nothing at all. In the detention room, white walls and fluorescent lights, Sarah sat alone and waited. She didn't have to wait long. Colonel Hardwick entered, his uniform still perfect, his expression carved from stone. He sat across from her, hands folded on the metal table between them. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied her like she was a problem he couldn't solve. "Specialist Vance," he finally said, "do you understand what you've done?" "Yes, sir." "You disobeyed direct orders, engaged enemy forces without authorization, compromised operational security, created an international incident." He leaned forward. "You've thrown away your career, possibly your freedom. Do you understand that?" "Yes, sir." "Then why?" The question came out harder than he probably intended. "Why would you do something so monumentally stupid?" Sarah met his eyes. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. "Because 12 men would be dead if I hadn't, sir. Because following your orders meant watching them die. Because some things matter more than my career." "You don't get to make that decision," Hardwick said, his voice sharp as a blade. "The chain of command exists for a reason. We see the bigger picture. We understand implications you can't. Your job is to follow orders, not question them." "My job is to protect American lives, sir. I did my job." Hardwick's jaw tightened. "You think you're a hero. You think disobeying orders makes you brave. It makes you dangerous. It makes you unreliable. It makes you everything a soldier shouldn't be." Sarah didn't argue, didn't defend herself. What was the point? He was right by his logic, by the logic of institutions and procedures and the bigger picture that valued order over lives. She'd been trained in that logic. She'd believed in it once. She just didn't believe in it anymore. "Alpha 6 is secure," she said quietly. "That's all that matters." "No, specialist, it's not." Hardwick stood. "You'll be held pending court-martial. Charges are being prepared. Insubordination, disobeying direct orders, possibly more. You're looking at military prison, dishonorable discharge. Your father served 28 years with distinction. This will destroy him." That hit harder than anything else. Her father, the man who'd taught her to salute, to march, to believe in something bigger than herself. What would he say when he learned his daughter had thrown it all away? When he learned she'd become everything he'd taught her not to be? Hardwick left, the door locked with a sound like finality. Sarah sat in the white room and waited for consequences. But there was something else waiting, something she didn't expect. 3,000 miles away, in a military hospital where Torres was getting his leg treated, Reed made a phone call. Then another. Then another. Within hours, every member of Alpha 6 was making calls. To senators, to representatives, to anyone who would listen. They told the story. 12 men abandoned. One woman who refused to abandon them. 90 seconds that proved courage wore the uniform of disobedience. The story spread, bars and bases, whispers and warnings. A specialist who'd committed career suicide to save lives the command structure had deemed acceptable losses. Some called her a hero. Some called her a traitor. Most just called her brave. The court-martial lasted 6 hours. Sarah sat in her dress uniform, medals she'd earned decorating her chest, while lawyers argued about orders and obedience and the thin line between courage and insubordination. Alpha 6 sat in the gallery, all 12. They'd taken leave, traveled across the country, sat in those wooden chairs and stared at the panel of officers who would decide Sarah's fate. Reed testified first. She saved our lives, command abandoned us. She didn't, that's all I know, that's all that matters. Hayes testified next. I have 3 kids, they have a father because of her. You want to punish that, go ahead, but know what you're punishing. Torres testified last, his voice quiet but steady. I'm 23 years old. I'm supposed to have a future. I do, because she gave it to me. So whatever happens to her, know that 12 men will spend the rest of their lives knowing their country saved them by accident. The panel deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, their faces showed nothing. The lead officer, a general whose ribbons covered half his chest, looked at Sarah with eyes that had seen too many wars. Specialist Vance, this panel finds you guilty of disobeying direct orders and engaging enemy forces without authorization. He paused. The courtroom held its breath. However, given the extraordinary circumstances and the testimony of the men whose lives you saved, this panel recommends clemency. You will be discharged from military service, not dishonorably. General discharge under honorable conditions. You will lose all benefits and pensions, but you will not face prison time. Sarah stood, saluted one last time. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, specialist. Thank the 12 men who wouldn't let us bury this quietly. He leaned forward. Off the record, I hope I never have to make the choice you made, and I hope if I do, I have the courage you showed. She walked out of that courtroom no longer a soldier, no longer bound by orders or rank or the chain of command that had left 12 men to die. She walked out free, honorable in the ways that mattered, even if the discharge papers said otherwise. But the story didn't end there. Because in Washington, where politicians and generals tried to explain why saving lives had required a trial instead of a medal, someone started asking uncomfortable questions. Why had Alpha 6 been abandoned? Who gave the order? What political consideration was worth 12 American lives? The congressional hearings were brutal. Hardwick testified, his perfect uniform somehow less impressive under congressional lights. He explained the political situation, the threat of international incident, the strategic considerations. He used words like assessment and risk mitigation and acceptable casualties. Representative Lisa Martinez, former Marine, cut through it. Colonel, were you aware that Specialist Vance had previously witnessed American deaths because extraction was denied? I was not aware of that specific incident. She watched Marines die 2 months before this operation, heard them over the radio, wrote the report, and you ordered her to watch it happen again. Is that correct? The situations were different. Were they? Because from where I'm sitting, they look identical. Americans abandoned for political convenience. The only difference is this time, someone said no. The hearings lasted weeks. Hardwick was reassigned. 3 other officers received reprimands. The procedures were reviewed. Changes were promised. Whether those changes would actually protect soldiers or just protect the institution remained unclear. But something else happened, something unexpected. The president issued a pardon, full and unconditional. Sarah Vance's discharge was upgraded to honorable, her benefits restored, her record cleared of everything except the truth. She'd saved 12 lives by refusing to let them die. The day the pardon was announced, Sarah received a package. Inside was an ornament, glass engraved with the number 90. No note, no explanation. She didn't need one. She knew who'd sent it. She hung it on her wall, a reminder, 90 seconds. That's all it took to change everything. 1 year later, on Christmas Eve, Sarah received an invitation, private gathering, no obligations, an address in Virginia. She drove through the December cold, passing houses decorated with lights and joy. She found the address. A quiet bar, warm light spilling through frosted windows. Inside, 12 men stood as she entered. Alpha 6. All of them, Reed, Hayes, Morrison, Torres, Chen, all the others whose names she'd memorized from reports and testimony. They stood at attention, a table set with 12 glasses and 1 empty chair. At ease, Sarah said, a small smile crossing her face. I'm not military anymore, don't have to salute. You'll always be military, Reed said, the good kind. They sat together, talked through the night, about the year that had passed, Torres twins, Hayes's 4th kid, Morrison's promotion, the rebuilding of trust in a military that had proven itself fallible, and Sarah's new life, private security, protecting people who reported truth in dangerous places, a job where her skills mattered and her judgment was trusted. Do you miss it? Reed asked. The military. Sarah thought about it. I miss the good parts, the mission, the purpose, the people. She looked around the table, people like you, but not the orders, never the orders, not when following them meant abandoning what's right. At midnight, they stepped outside. The Christmas lights of the city spread before them, families celebrating, lives continuing. A world that had no idea how close it had come to losing 12 of its protectors. Merry Christmas, Torres said. Merry Christmas, they all echoed. Sarah looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there in buildings and bases around the world, soldiers were following orders. Most of those orders were good, necessary, right, but some weren't. And when the bad orders came, Sarah hoped someone would have the courage to say no, to choose conscience over career, to decide that saving lives mattered more than protecting institutions. Thank you, Reed said quietly, for everything. Sarah nodded. Thank you for making it matter. They stood in the cold December air, 13 people bound together by 90 seconds that had changed everything. Next year they'd gather again, and the year after, and the year after that. 12 families would grow, 12 lives would continue, 12 futures would unfold. All because one woman had looked at orders and decided they were worth less than the lives they threatened. In her apartment, Sarah kept the crayon drawings from before, the Marine kids, her first act of disobedience. Now she added the cards from tonight, 12 reminders that courage wasn't about following orders, it was about knowing when to break them. The group dispersed slowly, handshakes, hugs, promises to stay in touch. Sarah was the last to leave. She stood alone on the street looking up at the Christmas lights. 90 seconds. That's all it had taken. 90 seconds to prove that one person could make a difference, that rules weren't always right, that sometimes the greatest act of service was disobedience. She thought about the young soldiers still serving, still following orders, still trusting the chain of command. And she hoped that when they faced their moment, when they had to choose between orders and conscience, they'd remember stories like hers, that they'd know courage meant saying no when no was the right answer, that they'd understand institutions exist to serve people, not the other way around. Sarah walked into the Christmas night, free, honorable, at peace. 12 men were home with their families tonight. And somewhere in Washington, politicians and generals were still trying to explain why that had required a presidential pardon instead of a medal. Sarah didn't need the medal, she had something better. She had 12 lives saved, 12 families whole, 12 futures secured. She had 90 seconds that mattered more than a lifetime of obedience. And she had the knowledge that when it counted most, when everything was on the line, she'd made the right choice. The story would spread, in bars and bases, in whispers and warnings, in classified reports and congressional hearings. Some would call it insubordination, disobedience, a dangerous precedent. Others would call it courage, honor, the truest form of service. The debate would continue. The arguments would rage. The system would defend itself. But 12 Navy SEALs would go home every Christmas, and that was answer enough. Christmas lights blinked in the darkness. Somewhere a bell rang, celebrating, calling the faithful to prayer or family to dinner. The sound carried across the city, across the year, across the distance between who we're told to be and who we choose to become. On a rooftop somewhere, maybe another soldier faced another impossible choice. Another set of orders that made no sense. Another moment where following rules meant abandoning right. And maybe, just maybe, they'd remember the story of Sarah Vance, the soldier who spat on orders and saved 12 lives in 90 seconds. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.